From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. School is back in session, and about 1 in every 7 K-12 public school students in Colorado attends class 4 days a week rather than 5. But a new report says that alternate schedule may lower the quality of their education. Since the 1980s, a growing number of Colorado districts have adopted the 4-day schedule, especially in smaller rural school districts. They often have smaller budgets than schools in affluent areas along the Front Range and in mountain towns. And researchers say these districts often move to 4 days per week to attract teachers when they can't offer a great salary. The report from the Keystone Policy Center, which studies economics, health, and education in Colorado, says the 4-day schedule may have a negative impact on student achievement. Keystone Senior Policy Director Van Scholes helped with the research and the writing. He talked to me about why his group created the report.
The reason why we did this study in the first place was because we saw that the number of school districts that were adopting 4-day weeks was growing, and it wasn't slowing down. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to have a statewide conversation about the merits of 4-day versus 5-day, and there hadn't been a large study, and there hadn't been a statewide conversation about the merits of 4-day versus 5-day.
So you and your colleagues decided to dig into this, and I want to talk about what you found, because your research found in most cases the 4-day week doesn't achieve the desired outcome, either for students or for teacher recruitment and retention.
Well, I think what we found was that in general, that in spite of folks saying that there was no difference between 4-day and 5-day in terms of educational outcomes, we found that there was a fairly significant difference, that on average, students experiencing 4-day school weeks were learning less, and they were learning at a slower rate than was the case in a 5-day school week.
If they're covering the same material as classes in other districts, why does it matter that they're at school 4 days a week instead of 5?
It's a great question, and I think that that's an argument that many people have made. You know, one of my hypotheses is that, I'm a former teacher and a former school leader. I think that there's a limit to how much learning can take place, particularly for elementary kids. And middle kids, sometimes doubling up on math in the course of a day for a 4th or 5th grader doesn't necessarily mean learning more math. It just means kids may be struggling to get through it because of just attention to learning. I think that that's a big challenge. We also see that all of the usual things that we see in 5-day school weeks, which is, sometimes Fridays are a little slower and less stuff going on. I suspect that that's also true for the Thursday or whatever the day is at the end of the week.
Well, you note, Van, that the data pointing to lower academic achievement isn't conclusive necessarily that it's a result of a 4-day week. I'm wondering if this could be due to other factors, like residual effects of the pandemic, or maybe just that small rural districts, as you mentioned, are not as well funded as urban districts.
Yeah, I think that there could be a variety of other things, though we did in this study, take a look at all districts. And so we did find nationally the research, which has been done at an individual student level as opposed to publicly available data at the school level, found many of the same conclusions that we did. There was no study that we were able to find in which kids were doing better in 4-day versus 5, but in most studies they were doing worse in 4-day versus 5-day. So our study sort of lined up with what the national research is saying on student achievement.
Still, in Colorado, I know that Todd Cordry, who's superintendent for Mancos School District, told the Colorado Sun he saw, quote, 0 negative consequences from a 4-day week, and that, in fact, it has given his instructors more time in the week for preparing lessons. What do you make of that?
I'm not going to dispute that. I think that there are certainly instances and places and contexts where it may make sense, and it totally depends upon the quality of the culture and the programming and the schools and the school district.
Sure.
And what's the community sort of leaning into in terms of providing support. And again, our study was looking at, on average, is this a good thing or not whether or not that is in Mancos or if it's in Brighton or not, because there are some places that say, hey, we like it and we think it's great for kids.
Right.
And we may even think that it's great for teachers. We just found that in general, it's not.
Yeah, one thing that I found was interesting too in the report is that the 4-day schedule doesn't always help with the teacher recruitment and retention, which is, I think, one of the main objectives. Why isn't that working?
We're not sure why that's not working, but we do know that it is not working. 4-day school week districts have higher turnover than 5-day school work weeks. And it may have something to do with the salaries. The salaries are often higher in 5-day. It may be that that's just not a big enough incentive for folks, or it may be something about the difference in the pool of teachers that are in 4-day versus 5-day. So again, we feel for districts that are sort of grasping at one way or another to try and grab and hold on to teachers, particularly when they don't have a lot of flexibility around salaries. This is why we raise the question, if the real issue is around teacher salaries, let's address the teacher salary issue.
Right.
Let's not play around with the schedule unless it's really about improving learning for kids.
Well, the report wraps up with some recommendations for districts that want to adopt or continue the 4-day school week. Could you briefly just talk about what those changes are?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest change would be to say from this point forward, the Colorado Department of Education should no longer just rubber stamp any proposals to go from 5 to 4-day. So have a more rigorous process and make the case for why it's going to be better for kids first. And that there be some follow-up and checking to see if in fact that's working. We also don't see any 4 days going to 5. The incentives to go from 4 or the ability for districts to go from 4 to 5 aren't there. There aren't financial incentives or anything else. So we're also calling for a statewide commissioner board to look at this issue. We feel strongly and know that far too many kids aren't prepared for the workforce or for college or for life in Colorado coming out of Colorado schools. And this is in spite of Colorado being one of the most educated states in the country. We have adults at a very high level education, and our public education system is not matching where adults are, nor the expectations for the state. So the last thing we should have is a mechanism to either flatten or diminish what kids can do.
Van Scholes is with Keystone Policy Center. He noted that some of the more interesting responses to the report came from leaders in districts with 5-day school weeks who felt pressure to go to 4 days, at least until they read this new report. You can read more about it in the show notes or at KUNC.org. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks for listening.